Well, I think I'm going to agree with Peter in many ways. I think I really only cover emergencies in Africa, or have done for a very long time. I think my growing concern with covering failed states has been a concern with the role that the NGOs are playing and the humanitarian industry is playing in the shaping of our coverage. I think if what tends to happen is journalists will go to Rwanda or Congo or Burundi or Darfur, and they need comment, and they also tend to need lifts, places that are safe to stay in, flights. These things are, guards if you're in Somalia, armed guards, and they need interpretation. They need someone they can quote. And so what do you do? Well, there's no credible government, or government may have sworn, or the authority in the place may have sworn to take you out in Somalia. That's been happening. So you tend to turn up at the MSF compound, and you'll probably take a ride in their jeep. You probably sleep in their compound. You will get pally with the Save the Children Fund or Oxfam representative, who you know anyway because you probably socialise with them in Nairobi, and they're probably friends of yours. And what you see is eventually a shaping of a coverage that is really a humanitarian type of coverage, and it's a blurring of the lines between what is independent journalism and a humanitarian angle on these crises. I think we saw this very much in Somalia, and we saw this very much in Darfur. And what tends to happen is, this is understandable when you have a real emergency and a place where journalists don't know where to turn, but they also then tend to do that in places where there is a government in place and there is another perspective available. I would have liked to see much more coverage of Darfur from the Khartoum perspective, and I don't remember seeing much of that. Why was the government in Khartoum doing what it was doing? How did it see that situation? There are increasing, as coverage becomes, this kind of foreign coverage, it's very expensive to go to places like Darfur. It's very expensive to cover Somalia because it's very dangerous, so you have to hire a band of armed guards to guard you. And a lot of stations have cut down on their foreign bureaus, and there are less and less journalists operating there. So it becomes increasingly tempting to hitch a lift with the NGOs. And I think what we're seeing is basically the independence is slowly leaking away from coverage of failed states. And we are becoming an arm of the humanitarian industry. And I think it's very important to remember that a lot of these organizations like Oxfam, Save the Children, to look at their budgets and where they get their money from. And each one will have a different percentage of how much money they get from the British government or the EU. And in some places it's 10%, VSO it's 90%, Save the Children are very proud that it's lower than Oxfam, if I remember. And so effectively, NGOs is a slightly misleading term, non-governmental organizations. So when we decide that we're not going to take an independent view, or we allow that to happen as journalists, we're effectively giving the British government and the British aid, DFID and British aid policy a bit of a free ride, because they are effectively intervening in failing states in a fairly big way, and we are then responding to that intervention as though it was de facto, moral, high-minded, idealistic. It is a form of government policy to a certain extent. And I think as journalists we've become either cynical or extremely naive about this. And the British public or the international public is under the illusion that these are NGOs, and they are under the illusion that anyone who describes themselves as an aid worker is an angel. And that everything they do is good and is politics free. And we, as journalists, when we ride along with that, we're basically underlining that attitude to the world. And something I've said in the past is, if I was a journalist and I was touring Africa and staying in the Unilever compound or the Mercedes-Benz compound, taking lifts on their jet, and being shown around by their representative, I would probably feel morally obliged to say that at a certain stage in my life. I hope I would, anyway. I certainly would if I was a travel writer, and I would say, you know, this was paid for by Thomas Cook or whatever. Journalists never say that. Well, they don't say, you know, I stayed in the compound. They will quote the MSF spokesman, but they won't say, you know...
Channel 4 News does.
All right, good. But I think there's a lot of dishonesty on this, and I just think, you know, say where you're getting from. There are good reasons often for staying in a NGO compound, and you know, but let's just be a bit more honest about it, because at the moment it seems to me it's willfully, it's deceptive and deceiving.
I completely agree with that, actually. I mean,
We all agree with
you're
that.
absolutely right.
I think there's clearly, there's clearly a difference between the bigger, surviving bigger broadcasting channels with Sirius and Tech, BBC, Channel 4 News, Reuters, and newspapers who, and there are many, there's great newspaper reporting, but many newspapers can't even afford to, you know, go from Canary Wharf to cover something at Westminster, let alone seriously do foreign news in the way that they used to. You know, the Daily Mirror used to have a Nairobi correspondent, after all. I mean, but those days are past.